Hello everyone. Thank you again for being with us with Tell Me Something Good. For our segment of Someone You Should Know, with us today is Mr. Tony Hylton.
I continue to look at a lot of the historical memorabilia that we had in both my grandmother's house and in the Foot Locker down in my basement. And I uncovered hundreds and hundreds of historically significant black and white photos, of which, with your assistance, Mr. Jenkins, I would hope to one day digitally archive. I'll take you on a journey through some of those pictures.
Now, how did he come about these pictures? What was his, you talked about his rank, but what was his responsibilities? Can you talk a little bit about that? Was he, naturally he was an airman, but well, there's other responsibilities because you have a lot of photos there, and one would think that these are photos that he took or he had access to. So elaborate on that a little bit.
In the older years, I did get a chance to really sit and talk with my dad, and in actuality, I made sure once I understood the significance of it. I used to hear in the 70s and in the 80s about this annual Tuskegee Airmen reunion, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. I had a group of uncles, as I call them, right? My godfather, Melvin T. Jackson, was not a blood relative, but he was one of my dad's fellow airmen. My Uncle Bobby, who passed away in the 80s, Robert Hylton, was a Tuskegee Airman. He was my father's blood brother. In fact, this is a picture of he and my Uncle Robert taken when they were in the force together. So I'm going to come around to the pictures and his role in having access to all these pictures in a moment. But I can look down the list of, as a little boy, as a little Tony, and a lot of my dad's Tuskegee Airmen brethren would call me Little Al, okay? Even though I was Antonio Allen Hylton, they would call me Little Al. And little did I realize at the time that I probably was a spitting image of my dad, but that they saw in me as a child all the things that they knew about my dad. So this little kid, Tony, would always go around with my dad, Uncle Sam's, Uncle Frank's, Uncle Donald, Uncle Red, which was Melvin T. Jackson. He was my godfather. And I come to find out that these were not the blood relatives that I had assumed the word uncle would be used with, but in fact, they were the guys who served with him. So when I would go around with my dad on the weekends, birthday parties and everything, referring to all my uncles, at the time I'm a kid, and so I always assumed that uncles was like Uncle Bobby. They were my father's blood in some way, shape, or form. But in fact, I found out that they really were his fellow Tuskegee Airmen. I mean, they were a close group of African American men. The thing about it is, as their careers and as their lives took them in different paths, I mean, I'd see the ups and the downs, the struggles that a lot of them had in America, in this place called America that was their home. And yet, they had been all over the world. They had been revered. They had been looked at as U.S. military men with the honor and the dignity that came with that. But if you understand the role of a Tuskegee Airman, it was to be the front fighter wing, to attract enemy bombers and enemy fire, so that the sweep behind them could target those areas to kill the enemy. And when you think of it in terms of that, and you understand that how these men survived in a world in which they were basically the carrot on the stick, then you realize that their lives were in that much more danger and peril. So along that career, my dad did become, I think he told me, a communications officer. And in that regard, he was an avid photographer. And so he traveled around with the military in that capacity. And that's why he was able to have access to so much of this history. It was archived, they're all stamped on the back. We know not who these men are or who their families are. And it would be my hope that if anybody, once they get to see the archived pictures, we intend to digitally preserve them and put them out on the web. If that becomes something that you believe is part of your family history, then please, you can contact the Tell Me Something Good show, Mr. Jenkins, and claim it. And I truly mean claim it, because we will have the archived documents, but in fact, if it's something that you or your family can take advantage of, it'll be yours for the asking. Growing up, again, you know, you hear about the ups and the downs of the civil rights movement. You realize that these Tuskegee Airmen who risked their lives to draw enemy fire so that the U.S. military could come behind them and then kill the enemies. When you realize that they survived and that they came back home to a world that didn't treat them well, and then the pieces of my life started to make sense. The fact that my grandmother would always take me to the back of the bus in the Bronx, New York. The fact that my dad would struggle in his corporate career. The fact that when I look at my Uncle Bob's picture, and he was a talented athlete. He had a couple Penn relay watches. When I realized that my Uncle Bob, and in most of the pictures that I saw of my father and my uncle in their different respective careers, one of which was one of the RCA Institute for Electrical Engineers. My dad continued on with after his military career and became an electrical engineer. In most of those cases, they were the only black people in the picture. And so you see that as America went, they didn't treat them very fairly when they came back here to American soil. And thus was launched the civil rights movement,